You know that feeling, right? Where you kind of assume you're really sensitive, government data, social security numbers, tax stuff, health info, it's all locked up tight.
Yeah, in separate boxes,
Ugh.
basically, siloed. Too much hassle for anyone to really connect the dots.
Exactly. But maybe we need to rethink that assumption. There are some reports coming out lately suggesting, well, a pretty big change might be happening.
And that's what's so interesting here, this idea that the very system designed to keep things separate might be getting dismantled.
Right. Imagine if those walls between, your financial life, your health, your identity, what if they started crumbling inside the government's own
The
systems?
implications are potentially huge.
Definitely. So today we're doing a deep dive into all the buzz around this project called DOGE. Now, you, our listener, sent us some really key sources. There was that news segment featuring Julia Angwin, the investigative
Ah,
journalist.
yeah, she's done some sharp work on this.
So our mission really is to cut through the noise, maybe some of the technical stuff, and just understand what's at the heart of this reported data gathering. Like what exactly is being pulled together, why now, and crucially, what could it actually mean for your privacy?
Okay, let's jump right in then. This alleged data aggregation by DOGE. The sources you flagged suggest a pretty intense effort, specifically over the last, 100 days or so.
Yeah, about that. Collecting personal data from a lot of different federal
And we're
databases?
not just browsing either.
No, not at all. That MSNBC segment we reviewed, it specifically mentioned a whistleblower report. Apparently, House Democrats were discussing it, raising concerns about a potential master
A
database.
master database.
Right.
That phrasing itself, it's quite stark.
It really is. Sounds like something from a spy thriller, this idea of one central place holding everything.
And think about the agencies involved. The reports name the Social Security Administration.
So, your main ID, your work history,
Uh-huh. Then the IRS.
your entire financial life, basically.
And the Department of Health and Human Services. Your health records. These aren't trivial data points. They're foundational.
Absolutely. Which just highlights how, well, massive the scope of this could be if those reports are accurate.
And the claim isn't just that they're accessing the data from different places.
Mm-hmm.
The core allegation is that DOGE is actively merging it, creating a single unified database.
Right. And the reporting even had that detail about alleged DOGE workers using multiple laptops.
Oh, yeah, loaded up with data from these separate agencies.
It really paints a picture of a deliberate, maybe even somewhat hurried operation.
It certainly suggests intent and scale. And, as Julie Angwin pointed out in her New York Times piece, which that MSNBC segment also referenced, this is a stunningly fast reversal of how things have always been done.
A reversal. How so?
Well, keeping that data separate, siloed, wasn't just like bureaucratic inefficiency. It was intentional. It functioned as a kind of privacy protection by design.
Ah, I see. So dismantling that structure so quickly.
It's a huge shift, a fundamental change in how government might be viewing and handling our personal information.
Okay, so let's try and unpack the why. Why would this be happening? The MSNBC segment kind of touched on this. It suggested the stated goals, things like saving money.
Right, the usual justifications.
They don't seem to quite line up with what's reportedly happening, especially with these mentions of mistakes being made and apparently no real course correction.
Yeah, if efficiency was the only goal, you'd expect them to fix the errors, right? Adjust the process.
Yeah.
But the reporting suggests that hasn't really been the focus.
So if the official story feels a bit shaky and you have these red flags, it really makes you wonder, what is the main objective here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The consistent thing, the activity that seems relentless according to these reports, is the data aggregation itself. That seems to be the primary focus.
And England's take on that from her op-ed was pretty blunt.
Extremely. She said, quote, DOGE is assembling a sprawling domestic surveillance system, the likes of which we have never seen in the United States.
Wow. Sprawling domestic surveillance system. That's incredibly strong language.
It is, and her reasoning digs into this idea of, well, an authoritarian impulse, the desire for what she calls comprehensive dossiers.
Dossiers? Like detailed files on everyone.
Essentially, yeah, files that are easy to pull up, easy to search, connecting all those different parts of your life, financial health, social security. It goes beyond just having data scattered around.
It becomes readily accessible, interconnected life histories.
Exactly, which naturally brings up the question of purpose. Why build such a thing? And what are the risks?
And this is where the comparison to China came up in the sources, right? The social credit system.
Angwin drew that parallel, yes, pointing to it as an example of how comprehensive citizen data can be used not just for monitoring, but actively for control,
Mm.
for punishing dissent or nonconformity.
Okay, but hang on. Is that comparison entirely fair? I mean, are the contexts and maybe the stated intentions different enough that we should be cautious, even while acknowledging the potential danger?
That's a really important nuance. The potential for misuse is definitely the concern Angwin raises, regardless of the initial stated intent, which itself seems a bit unclear based on the reporting.
So the capability itself is the worry.
Precisely. The ability to quickly build these detailed profiles could be tempting for all sorts of reasons down the line, even if they aren't the current reasons. That historical separation of data acted as a kind of built-in brake on that capability.
Okay, so we have this alleged huge data grab happening fast, unclear motives, and serious worries about potential misuse, maybe even political targeting down the road.
The idea of going after political enemies was floated as a potential risk in the discussions referenced.
Right, so what's stopping this? What are the safeguards? This is where the sources started talking about U.S. privacy law, or maybe the lack thereof.
Yeah, and this is fascinating, in a concerning way. Current U.S. law seems almost, well, unprepared for something like this. As Angwin explained, the U.S. doesn't have one big, overarching federal privacy law like many other countries do.
No GDPR equivalent, for example.
Exactly. And we also lack a dedicated data protection authority. A specific government agency whose whole job is to watch over this kind of thing.
So who is watching? What laws do apply?
Well, there's the Federal Privacy Act of 1974, but it was passed nearly 50 years ago. Different world, different technology.
Okay, so what was it designed for?
Primarily, it focused on letting individuals see and correct their own records held by federal agencies and putting some limits on disclosure. Think good faith errors, making sure your specific file was accurate, preventing one agency from just handing your file to another without a valid reason back then.
Not really designed for preventing the creation of a massive, interconnected master database from multiple sources.
Not really, no. It wasn't built to handle this kind of potentially systemic large-scale aggregation with the intent, alleged or otherwise, of creating comprehensive dossiers.
So what happens if something goes wrong under that act? What are the teeth? The MSNBC segment mentioned Angwin saying the penalties are minimal.
That's the assessment presented. Really no fines was the phrase used, I believe. The main remedies discussed were things like correcting inaccurate data in a file or maybe forcing the agency to publish a notice about its data practices.
That doesn't sound like much of a deterrent if someone is trying to build these massive dossier files, as Angwin calls them. Correcting a mistake seems secondary if the goal is the collection itself.
You've hit on the core issue. The existing legal framework seems potentially mismatched to the scale and nature of the activity described in these reports. It wasn't designed for a scenario involving potentially millions of interconnected, highly sensitive records.
Okay, so let's try to wrap our heads around this. If we boil it down, what are we looking at? It feels like a potential situation where huge amounts of very personal data are being centralized incredibly quickly.
At unprecedented speed, according to the reports.
With motives that aren't fully clear and under a legal system that might not have the tools to effectively oversee or control it.
That really sums up the concerns raised by the sources, yes. And understanding that picture, the scope, the speed, the legal gaps, that's crucial.
As the MSNBC segment suggested, maybe that understanding is the necessary first step if there's going to be any kind of political or public response.
Absolutely. Awareness precedes action, always.
And just to reiterate for everyone listening, our goal here isn't to lean one way or the other politically. We're focused on relaying the information from the sources you provided us and analyzing what the experts, like Angwin, are saying about the potential impact on privacy.
Exactly. We're reporting on the allegations and the analysis presented in those materials, particularly concerning data privacy principles and the current legal landscape.
So bringing it all together then, what's the single most important takeaway from our dive today?
I think the core issue is this. The reported rapid assembly of a central database combining sensitive personal information from key federal agencies, Social Security, IRS, Health and Human Services, by this Project DOGE.
Okay. And the significance?
It raises really significant privacy flags, both because of the potential for misuse surveillance, targeting, whatever it might be, and because our current U.S. privacy laws seem, based on this analysis, potentially ill-equipped to prevent or even properly address this kind of large-scale data consolidation.
Right. It leaves you with a pretty unsettling thought, doesn't it? We've historically relied on these data silos, this separation, as a kind of default privacy protection.
Imperfect, maybe, but it was a barrier.
So here's the question to really chew on. If those barriers are taken down, maybe permanently, what does that mean for society in the long run? Even if the intentions right now are claimed to be benign, what happens when that capability exists?
What kind of future does that create if this level of data integration becomes the new normal for how government interacts with citizen information?
Exactly. That's something for you, our listener, to really mull over. Because in this landscape, technology and policy are changing so fast.
And understanding these shifts, staying informed, engaging with these complex questions about data privacy, it's becoming more critical than ever. It's a conversation we all need to be part of.